Just confirming that everyone can see my screen there. Yes, good. Okay, so welcome everyone to the joint Dufferin County Candidate Financial Information session. My name is Tracy McDonald. I'm the Deputy Clerk for the Town of Orangeville. And today, representatives from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing will be providing information on campaign finances as it pertains to the 2022 municipal election. Our presenters today are Caitlin Reddick. She's a municipal advisor with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing and has been with the Ontario Public Service for 6 years as a policy analyst and an assistant planner with MMAH. She has a bachelor's degree from the University of Toronto in Human Geography and City Studies. Jen Costeria recently joined the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing as a municipal advisor in March of this year. Jen has been with the Ontario Public Service since 2018 as a consultant and manager with the Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services. The ladies will now provide their presentation.
Thank you very much. And I would like to thank the town of Orangeville and Dufferin County for inviting us here to give you this presentation. So we'll go to the next slide, please. These slides are meant to be a summary of some of the sections and should not be relied on for legal or official purposes. This is sort of our disclaimer. I do want to stress that we are not lawyers and that you should always consult the legislation and seek legal advice when necessary. We will not be able to cover every aspect of the municipal elections, but we hope that this provides you with a better understanding of the processes and the legislation and improves your level of comfort. I just want to congratulate you all for taking an interest in your community and in the local government, whether you're interested in serving on a municipal council or on a school board or registering as a third-party advertiser. Next slide, please. So tonight we're just going to do an overview of campaign finances and compliance audit, and we'll give some resources at the end as well. Next slide, please. So moving right in, we're going to talk about campaign contributions. So campaign accounts are only required if a candidate or a third-party advertiser raises or spends money. So for acclamations and campaigns where no funds are raised or spent, there is no need for a campaign account. Trade unions and corporations are not eligible to contribute to candidates' campaigns, although they can participate in the election as third-party advertisers or make contributions to third-party advertising campaigns. Third-party advertisers will generally need to follow the same rules for raising campaign funds and financial reporting as candidates for office. Municipalities must establish rules and procedures regarding the use of municipal or local board resources during the campaign period. This must be passed by May 1st of the year of the election. This will encourage accountability and transparency, so ensure that you are aware of your municipality's policy in this regard. The practice of municipalities of providing candidate contact information on their websites is not a contribution. Generally, the same contributions rules will apply to third-party advertiser campaigns as to candidates, so we can refer to both when the rules apply to both. Next slide, please. Contributions from the candidate and their spouse are considered to have come from the same person and count against the self-contribution limit. The rules for determining whether corporations are considered to be one contributor are clarified. If one corporation controls the other directly or indirectly, then they are considered to be the same contributor. If the corporations are owned or controlled by the same person or groups of persons, either directly or indirectly, they are considered to be the same contributor. Next slide, please. Candidates and third-party advertisers cannot accept contributions from a federal political party, constituency association, or registered candidate in a federal election, a provincial political party, constituency association, or a registered candidate or leadership contestant, a federal or a provincial government, a municipality, a school board, or a business, or a group that is not a corporation. When we talk about volunteers, so the value of services provided by a volunteer is generally not considered to be a contribution. If a professional, so example being an accountant or a lawyer, volunteers to provide services for which they would normally be paid, the market value of the services must be recorded as a contribution by the volunteer and is considered a campaign expense. As mentioned previously, only third-party advertisers can accept contributions from corporations and unions. Next slide, please. Campaign contributions are monies, goods, or services given to a candidate for his or her election campaign. Cash contributions may only be accepted up to $25. Contributions more than $25 must be made by a check, money order, or another method that clearly shows where the funds have come from. Fundraising functions are events or activities held by or on behalf of a candidate for the primary purpose of raising money for the candidate's campaign. The price of admission to a fundraising function is a campaign contribution, and a receipt must be issued for the full amount. Receipts must be issued for every contribution that's received and should contain the name and the address of the contributor and the amount as well as the date. Next slide, please. We're going to talk about some contribution limits. So the limit on contributions to any one candidate or registered third-party advertiser is $1,200, except for in the City of Toronto mayoral candidates, in which case the amount is $2,500. The individual contribution amount has increased from $750 to $1,200, but the aggregate amount of $5,000 stays the same. Since candidates and third-party advertisers are required to inform contributors of the contribution limits, you may want to include the limits on the receipts provided to the contributors. Next slide, please. Self-funding limits. So for self-funding limits for municipal council candidates, it's based on the number of electors voting for the office to the maximum of $25,000 per candidate. The formula for calculating the limit is $7,500 plus 20 cents per elector for the head of council and $5,000 plus 20 cents per elector for the other council offices. The highest self-funding limit that anyone can possibly have is $25,000. So if the formula works out to a number that's over $25,000, you still just get the $25,000 limit. And if the formula works out to less than 25,000, then you get whatever the formula works out to. Next slide, please. Borrowing. So loans can only be borrowed loans can only be borrowed from a bank or other recognized lending institution in Ontario and must be directed into the campaign account. Loans may only be guaranteed by the candidate or their spouse. Generally, the same borrowing rules will apply to third-party advertisers. While candidates can open their campaign account with their own funds, the candidate cannot loan funds to his or her campaign to kickstart it with the intention of getting it all back. The only way that a candidate can reclaim the startup amount is after the election campaign period ends and prior to filing their financial statement, the candidate or his or her spouse may be refunded any contributions from the surplus. You can't receive a loan from a family member or from a corporate account that you may have access to. The loan isn't considered to be a campaign income, and paying it back is not a campaign expense. But if you or your spouse guarantee the loan and the campaign does not repay it all, the remaining balance is considered to be a contribution, since the guarantee or the guarantor is basically providing the campaign the means to repay the loan. So keep in mind that contribution limit for the candidate and spouse if you're borrowing. Any interest that the campaign pays on the loan is considered a campaign expense. Next slide. We'll start talking about campaign expenses. So the following are considered campaign expenses: the replacement value of goods retained by the person, individual, corporation, or trade union from any previous election in the municipality and used in the current election, the value of contributions of goods and services, audit and accounting fees, interest on loans that would be under section 88.17, and the cost of holding fundraising functions, the cost of holding parties and making other expressions of appreciation after the close of voting, and for candidate expenses related to the recount or proceeding under section 83, expenses relating to a compliance audit, expenses that are incurred by a candidate with a disability or a registered third party who is an individual with a disability are directly related to the disability and would not have been incurred but for the election to which the expenses relate. The cost of election campaign advertisements. So within the meaning of section 88.3 or third party advertisements, as the case may be. For greater certainty, the cost of holding fundraising functions does not include costs related to A, the events or activities that are organized for such purposes as promoting public awareness of a candidate and at which the soliciting of contributions is incidental, or the promotion of materials in which the soliciting of contributions is incidental. Next slide, please. Candidates and third-party advertisers should become familiar with campaign expense provisions. Campaign expenses are those costs incurred by the candidate or on the candidate's behalf during his or her campaign or by a third-party advertiser during their campaign. The nomination filing fee is no longer an expense and is not included on the financial disclosure form. Goods and services donated to the campaign are also expenses and must be reported. A receipt must be provided for fair market value. Only nominated persons or third-party advertisers can incur expenses during the campaign period. Payment of any campaign expense must be drawn from the campaign account, and a receipt providing the details and proof of payment must be obtained. All expenses must be reported in the relevant financial disclosure form to be filed with the clerk by the candidate or the third-party advertiser. With respect to campaign inventory, if you ran in the last election and want to use leftover goods such as signs or office supplies, you have to determine what the current market value for those goods is and what it would cost for you if you were to purchase them today. These amounts are recorded as expenses. Conversely, if you end up with leftover inventory at the end of this campaign and it becomes your personal property, but if you want to store them to use in another election, any cost for storage is not considered a campaign expense. Next slide, please. Spending limits. So the spending limit formula for candidates and the maximum amount for parties after voting day are set out in Regulation 101/97. The clerk calculates the spending limits twice. So once upon the candidate filing the nomination form, the clerk shall calculate the spending limit based on the number of electors on the voters list as it existed on September 15th, 2018. The second calculation is based on the number of electors on the voters list that exists on September 15th, 2022. This calculation must be provided to candidates on or before September 25th, 2022. Whatever number is higher is the spending limit, and the clerk's calculation is final. Next slide, please. The clerk will continue to provide estimates of the spending limits. Candidates will be required to inform their contributors of the contribution limits, that being how much a contributor can contribute to an individual candidate's campaign, and the aggregate limit on contributions to any one council or local board election. The spending limit to be provided by September 25th. If a third-party advertiser has registered in more than one municipality, each registration is a separate campaign with its own spending limits. The campaign finance rules are generally the same for third-party advertisers as they are for candidates. Example being, they're subject to the same contribution limits and have the same calculated spending limits. This includes financial filing requirements, requests for extensions, and records. Third-party advertisers are also required to ensure contributions and expenses are tracked and accounted for. Proper record retention, proper direction is provided to those incurring expenses or accepting contributions on their behalf, and that spending limits are adhered to. Next slide, please. Expenses that are not subject to the spending limit. Most expenses are subject to the spending limit. The ones that I'm listing in this slide are not. Expenses related to fundraising functions are exempt from the campaign spending limit, but in order to qualify as a fundraising function, an event must have the raising of money as its primary purpose. Campaign events at which incidental fundraising takes place do not qualify as fundraising functions. Similarly, a brochure promoting awareness of a candidate that contains contact information to make campaign contributions doesn't qualify as a fundraising function. Expenses that were subject to the spending limit if occurred before voting day are not subject to the spending limit if incurred after voting day. Next slide, please. Third-party advertiser spending limits will be subject to third-party advertisers will be subject to two spending limits. There's a general spending limit and a separate limit for expenses related to parties and expressions of appreciation after the close of voting. So in Ontario Regulation 101/97 provides the following formula for calculating third-party spending limits, which this is $5,000 plus 5 cents per elector to a maximum of $25,000. The formula used is based on the number of electors entitled to vote in an election in the municipality. The Municipal Elections Act also provides that the spending limit for parties and other expressions of appreciation after voting day be set at 10% of the general spending limit. This would be consistent with the spending limit in place for candidates. At this point, I'm going to pass it over to Caitlin, and she's going to continue with some more campaign finance rules.
Thank you. So next slide, please. Thank you. So campaign finance rules. As a candidate or a third-party advertiser, it is important that you be fully aware of the responsibilities regarding election spending and accepting campaign contributions. A question we are asked each municipal election is whether there is a requirement for every candidate to have a chief financial officer, and the answer is no. We suggest that you familiarize yourselves with sections 88.8 through 88.21 of the Municipal Elections Act, and also the financial statements that you will be required to file. This will help guide you in organizing your records and how they have to be reported. You are required under the Municipal Elections Act to keep accurate records and open a campaign bank account if you're spending any money or accepting any contributions. A bank account is not required if a candidate or third-party advertiser does not receive nor spend money. Next slide, please. Campaign finance rules continued. So candidates and third-party advertisers are required to keep complete and accurate financial statements during the course of their campaigns. All contributions and expenses are to be accounted for and disclosed by the candidate on the relevant prescribed financial form. All candidates and third-party advertisers are required to keep all campaign financial records until after November 15th of 2026, when a new council takes office. These rules apply whether you are elected or not. Pass the hat donations that are under $25 may be given anonymously, and you don't have to issue a receipt. This is campaign income that is not considered to be a contribution, and the total amount received must be reported as such on the campaign financial statement. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. As a best practice, candidates and third-party advertisers should store receipts in a secure place as they are valuable documents. Receipts must be signed by the candidate or his or her designate. It is good practice to have a receipt that is a multi-part form, one for the contributor and one or more for the candidate's records. Receipts should be sequentially numbered. Open a bank account which provides monthly statements and cancel checks. Produce duplicate deposit slips for every deposit, listing the names of the contributors and the amounts received from each. Maintain a petty cash fund to handle minor expenses and obtain invoices to support all payments from the fund. At any time, the cash on hand plus the total amount of invoices should equal the original amount of the petty cash fund. The fund can be replenished periodically by a check drawn on the campaign account in an amount equal to the total amount of the invoices. Candidates and third-party advertisers may find it useful to look over Form 4 for candidates and Form 8 for third-party advertisers, respectively, at the beginning of the campaign to give them an idea of what information will be needed to report on at the end of the campaign. Requirements under the Municipal Elections Act to maintain records is until November 15th of 2023. Next slide, please. Thank you. Campaign advertisements. The period for third-party advertisers as shown on the slide is the period when the rules for third-party advertisers applies. In 2022, that has already passed, and that was May 1st of 2022 until the close of voting at 8 p.m. on October 24th of 2022. Third-party advertisers and candidates are required to identify themselves on signs and advertisements. For more information on that, please refer to the Municipal Elections Act for candidates, section 88.3, and for third-party advertisers, 88.4. Next slide, please. Thank you. Campaign advertisements continue. The broadcaster or publisher of a third-party or candidate advertisement shall maintain records containing the following information for a period of 4 years after the date the advertisement appears, and shall permit the public to inspect the records during normal business hours. The name of the candidate third-party advertiser, registered third-party advertiser, the name, business address, and telephone number of the individual who deals with the broadcaster or publisher under the direction of the candidate or registered third-party advertiser, a copy of the advertisement or the means of reproducing it for inspection, a statement, and lastly, a statement of the charge made for its appearance. Next slide, please. Financial statements. Under section 88.25 of the Municipal Elections Act, all candidates are required to file Form 4 with the clerk regardless of how much or how little they spent or fundraised. If you filed a nomination form, you must file a Form 4. This form is required even if you withdrew your nomination or were acclaimed. If you registered as a third-party advertiser, you must complete Form 8. A candidate may resubmit a financial statement to correct an error or until the filing deadline. The clerk is required to make public a report of which candidates filed financial statements and which did not. Next slide, please. Thank you. Financial statements continued. The appointment of an auditor by the candidate is mandatory if expenses or contributions exceed $10,000. The auditor must be licensed under the Public Accounting Act 2004, and please note that campaign statements are public documents. Next slide, please. Financial statements continued. Candidates can file their financial documents at any time after voting day to January 3rd, adjusted from December 31st as it falls on a Saturday. Filing the financial statement ends the campaign period. This will make it easier for acclamations and campaigns where little or no expense is incurred. Clerks will be required to report whether candidates have met their financial filing obligation and publish that report on the municipal website or in another electronic form. This needs to be done by April 30th in the case of a regular election or with 90 days of a by-election. Clerks can determine the conditions for the electronic filing of financial statements. Next slide, please. Thank you. Financial statements continued, part 4. The nomination fee is only refundable if the financial statement is filed on time. A candidate or third-party advertiser who misses the financial deadline may file within the 30-day grace period, provided a $500 late filing fee is paid to the municipality. A candidate who chooses to file within the 30-day grace period will be subject both the $500 late filing fee as well as the loss of their nomination refund. A candidate third-party advertiser may resubmit a financial statement to correct an error up until the filing deadline. Next slide, please. This is a slide that we get a lot of questions on, so just letting everyone know. Surplus. When filing the financial statement, a candidate or third-party advertiser with a campaign surplus must pay the entire amount to the clerk. Prior to paying over any surplus funds to the clerk, a candidate or third-party advertiser is entitled to a refund of any contributions they or their spouse, if an individual, made to the campaign, not to anyone else. The amount that may be refunded is the lesser of the amount of the relevant contribution or the amount of the surplus. The clerk is required to place surplus monies in trust for use by the candidate if they need it for a compliance audit. The clerk is required to place surplus monies in trust for use by the third-party advertiser if they need it for a compliance audit. If neither the candidate nor third-party advertiser requires the funds for these purposes, it becomes the property of the municipality or school board. Next slide, please. Thank you. Compliance audit. Every council and school board must establish a compliance audit committee. Members of a compliance audit committee cannot be members of the council or school board, an employee, a candidate in the election, or a registered third-party advertiser. Clerks are to review contributions and to prepare a report for consideration by the Compliance Audit Committee if a contributor appears to have exceeded any contribution limits. This process is related to reviewing contributions as reported on the financial statements and is not connected to the compliance audit process. If it is apparent to the clerk that a contributor has exceeded one or more of the contribution limits, the clerk would report this to the committee, which would meet to determine whether to proceed with legal action. The legislation does not specify what details are to be provided in the report to the committee. Electors entitled to vote in an election may apply for a compliance audit even if the candidate has not filed a financial statement. The application must be in writing and set out the electors' reasons for why they believe the Municipal Elections Act has been contravened. The application must be submitted to the municipal clerk or the secretary of the school board within 90 days of the filing deadline. The Compliance Audit Committee will consider the application and decide whether to retain an auditor to undertake a compliance audit of the candidate's financial return. Next slide, please. Compliance audit continued. The Compliance Audit Committee is required to provide brief written reasons for its decisions. Compliance Audit Committee meetings are required to be open to the public, but the committee may deliberate in private. Electors can apply for a compliance audit of a third-party advertiser's campaign finances. The minister has the authority to make a regulation setting out qualifications for compliance audit committee members. In the Municipal Elections Act, Section 88.33, subsection 8, the written reasons for the committee's decisions shall be given to the candidate, the clerk with whom the candidate filed his or her nomination, the secretary of the local board, if applicable, and the applicant. If an audit occurs, the report must be circulated to the same individuals. The committee audit, the Compliance Audit Committee considers the auditor's report. If the compliance audit determines that there has been an apparent contravention of the Municipal Elections Act, the committee will decide whether to proceed with legal actions. Decisions of the committee may be appealed to the Superior Court of Justice. A person who believes that the candidate has contravened the Municipal Elections Act may proceed with legal action without having first obtained a compliance audit. Next slide, please. Thank you. Offenses. In the Municipal Elections Act, Section 90, subsection 2, an offense described in subsection 3 constitutes a corrupt practice, and a person who commits it is a conviction, disqualified from voting at an election until the next regular election has taken place after the election to which the offense relates, in addition to being liable to any other penalty provided for in this act. No person shall directly or indirectly offer, give, lend, or promise or agree to give or lend any valuable consideration in connection with the exercise or non-exercise of an elector's vote, advance pay or cause to be paid money intending that it be used to commit an offense referred to in Clause A, or knowing that it will be used to repay money used in that way, give, procure, or promise or agree to procure an office or an employment in connection with the exercise or non-exercise of an elector's vote, apply for, accept, or agree to accept any valuable in consideration or office or employment in connection with the exercise or non-exercise of an elector's vote. And lastly, give, procure, or promise or agree to procure an office or employment to induce a person to become a candidate, refrain from becoming a candidate, or withdraw his or her candidacy. Next slide, please. In general, the following penalties are available to the courts upon conviction of an offense under the Municipal Elections Act. An individual, a maximum fine of $25,000 up to 6 months imprisonment, ineligibility to run in the next general election, or if convicted of a corrupt practice to vote in next general election. A candidate penalties for an individual plus fine for excess campaign expenses, forfeit of office if offense committed knowingly, and trade unit or corporation, maximum fine of $50,000. Ineligibility to vote is a penalty if you're convicted of a corrupt practice. Please see the Municipal Elections Act, Section 90. Next slide, please. Key dates. Voting day is Monday, October 24th, 2022, between 10 a.m. to 8 p.m., unless reduced hours are set out in a bylaw for retirement homes or institutions, or council has passed a bylaw to open voting earlier than 10 a.m. This is in Section 46 of the Municipal Elections Act. The campaign period, the time when a candidate can accept contributions and incur election expenses, runs from the date the nomination is submitted up until January 3rd of 2023. The campaign period, the time the third-party advertiser can incur expenses, begins on the date their registration is certified. So the earliest date was May 1st of 2022 until January 3rd of 2023. The deadline for the filing of the campaign financial statement in the clerk's office is Friday, March 2023, no later than 2 p.m. All candidates and third-party advertisers must file this statement regardless of how much they spent or received in contributions. Next slide, please. Resources. The first link will take you to the e-laws website, where all provincial legislation is available online, including the associated regulations. You will want to be familiar with the Municipal Elections Act, the Municipal Act, the Municipal Conflicts of Interest Act, and if running for a school board, the Education Act. The second link is to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing website. From this site, you will be able to access the 2022 voter, candidate, and third-party advertisers guides. There's also the Municipal World link. So once on the Municipal World website, if you click on the icon bookshop, it illustrates a list of books that are related to running for municipal office. They are available to purchase online. Next slide. So this concludes our presentation. If you have any questions, please reach out to your municipal advisor. It says Jane, but it's actually Jennifer Costeria who's on the line with us today. So if you would like to reach out to her, her email is Jennifer, JENNIFER, period, Costeria, KOSTYRIA @ontario.ca. Thank you very much. And I'm going to pass it over to Tracy.
Thanks very much, Caitlin and Jennifer. Really appreciated that presentation, and I'm sure everyone found it very informative. Just letting everyone know, we'll be taking questions now. If anyone listening has a question, they could email that to elections@orangeville.ca, or they could call into the meeting at 1-289-801-5774, conference ID 545-001-621. I can also just share my screen for 1 second more, if everyone will bear with me. I'll put up the contact information for the various municipalities. Just if a candidate has a question for who's running in Amaranth, there's the contact for them. Same for East Scariffraxa, Grand Valley, Melanchthon, Mono, Mulmer, of course, Orangeville, and Shelburne. So I will open it up now to any questions. Anyone on the line has questions, just please feel free to unmute and ask away.
I had one,
Okay.
Tracy, but it was answered in the chat, so thank you for that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
If we
I
don't
also
receive,
put
oh,
some
sorry.
links to the, sorry, I was just going to say, I just put some links to the candidates guide, the financial sections that has lots of information that helps guide you through some of that. So those are in the chat as well if you want to grab those. Go ahead, Caitlin.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say if we don't have any questions, Tracy, I can maybe provide some questions that we've received that are tricky ones that most people don't know about, such as like, does a candidate's personal Facebook page become a campaign page when posting campaign related material? Is there a remedy for candidates to preserve their personal postings and such? So generally speaking, the Municipal Elections Act addresses the financial aspects of campaigning and does not regulate activities that do not involve spending money, such as posting on social media, such as Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, speaking to friends and neighbors, and sending an email to a group or mailing list. As such, the Act does not require candidates to establish a separate campaign account on social media platforms. Should a candidate wish to spend money on campaigning advertising, including paid promotions on social media, they are required to comply with the campaign finance rules under the Act, which is under section 88.8 through to 88.37. I notice that's a common question we get, like, oh, if I post on social media, is that considered a campaign expense? So no. Another one we get is, oh, sorry.
I was going to say I have one too. The one that I get asked a lot is, can campaign donations be accepted from a website such as PayPal or GoFundMe? So the answer to this is that candidates are responsible for keeping complete records of each contribution. They should be able to demonstrate that they have complied with the campaign finance rules, and they should be subject, if they're subject to a compliance audit. So if any payments are made by PayPal, check, or are anonymous, so sometimes with GoFundMe and PayPal you can put in a donation without any information, those payments would be deemed ineligible and would have to be turned over to the clerk. So the rule is that it has to show clearly where the donation is coming from with a name and address to be an eligible contribution, but you can accept contributions through a website as PayPal or GoFundMe as long as you can prove.
I think she froze. Oh, you froze for a second. I could say one more. So can a third-party advertiser who files a nomination transfer their funds or expenses to someone else? So the existing campaign finance rules applies. A third-party advertiser who withdraws and closes their campaign cannot transfer their campaign to someone else. If you want more information about that, please refer to section 88.29, subsection 1.1 of the Municipal Elections Act for more information.
So I'll take another call for questions. Any callers on the line? It's *6 to unmute if anyone is calling in by phone, wishes to ask a question. Again, anyone on the line who wishes, just hop in right now and ask away. Okay, seeing none. Jennifer and Caitlin, if you have more information to share, please do so. Otherwise, I will thank you for your time.
I don't believe we do, but if questions come up after the fact, you can always reach out to myself, your municipal advisor, and I will help you out as best I can.
Perfect. And for any candidates on the line, again, just you can always also direct any questions you may have to the clerk of that municipality. We're all happy to assist when and where we can. And then just again, Jennifer and Caitlin, thanks so much. Really valuable information. I'm sure it's very helpful to our candidates. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us, and I hope everyone has a wonderful night.
Enjoy the rest of the good weather while it's here.
Thank you.